Welcome to Pajamas and Wrenches, the podcast where we share warm fuzzies for your creative well and cool tools for your creative challenges. I'm PJ Gardner Schweitzer, author of the Horace and Bunwinkle series and The Great Zudini from HarperCollins. And this is
I'm Sarah Allen. I am the author of four middle grade novels from Macmillan: What Stars Are Made Of, Breathing Underwater, The Nightmare House, and Monster Tree.
yeah.
So there we go.
All right, sounds good. So let's get into inspiration, right?
Yes,
What's been
and you
inspiring?
are talking to us about what has been inspiring you lately.
Well, I'm sort of embarrassed to admit this, but what's been inspiring me lately is the Rockford files. Um,
That's amazing.
I, so okay, okay, I have loved James Garner since as long as I can remember. I mean, I have had a crush on him like forever. And he's passed obviously now, but like I loved him. And even as a kid, I loved him. And I was raised by my grandparents and my grandpa, who I called Pa, my pa watched, he used to watch endless reruns. He had a heart attack when he was um in 19, oh, I don't remember now, like 1982, 1983. And he was home after that. And so he watched a lot of TV. And so we often would watch stuff together. He had like Matlock and you know what I mean? And these, but the Rockford Files, right, would come on and that was kind of like I would watch that with him. I love, first of all, the character Jim Rockford is so charming, right? Like he's like this lovable loser because nothing ever really works out for him. He lives in this like ramshackle mobile home in
Okay.
Malibu, right? And stuff. And of course, then there's all these stars who were young. They had Lindsay Wagner, who also, I mean, I wanted to be the Bionic. It was Bionic Woman and Wonder Woman. Like those were the two. I was like, I want to be that someday. Even though one you had to be born because she was in Amazon, and the other one, like you had to, anyway, like have like
Yeah. Yeah.
mechanical parts. Like none of that was going to happen. But I loved them. James Woods was in this one I watched last night, and Abe
Okay.
Vigoda. Uh, I love. I love the character himself.
Uh-huh.
It's just like he got beat up a bunch of times in the episode last night, and he's cracking jokes the whole time. And
Okay.
I'm like, I really love that sort of smart aleck guy who keeps trying to talk himself out of trouble and usually winds up talking himself into uh, trouble.
Uh-huh.
So I love that. And then and in part, I love this because I have I have a PI story
Mhm.
and I had been trying to get the right feel for it. It's more cozy mystery type of PI type of thing.
Fun. Fun.
Or fantasy, cozy fantasy, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, so anyway, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want anyone to steal my idea. Uh, but so I had been thinking, oh, it's hard boiled. It's like fantasy plus a hard boiled detective. And it didn't like that didn't vibe for me quite right.
Mhm.
But smart aleck and a lovable loser, like I'm like, oh, is he just Jim Rockford only in this fantasy setting? And then I was like,
Perfect.
yeah, he is. And it works for me. So I love it. And then I don't know if you remember Stephen J. Cannell was a mystery writer, but also he did a lot of mystery shows. Like he was a producer and
Okay.
writer. So he wrote a lot for it. And it some of them are really, really well done. Which beats, I don't know, I'm gonna say something painful, Murder She Wrote. Because like I've been reading She Wrote also because I love Angela Lansbury, but those plots are terrible. Like Murder She Wrote plots, you're like, oh my stars, how did this run forever? So yeah, so that's really what's been inspiring me. I do
That's
love,
awesome.
like, I think my normal genre really that I love to read and that I actually really like writing is mystery, and
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
so that's kind of why I think it's been inspiring me. So
So what specifically into so you say the plots, right? Do you have any more like insight or analysis on why the Rockford Files plots are more successful than the Murder She Wrote ones? And
well,
how those might be inspiring
right.
more?
Like, first of all, like in all the Murder She Wrote ones, the cops eventually wind up being like, Miss Fletcher, you tell me what to do. Even
Yeah.
city for a book thing. And you're like, no, like for real. No. I mean,
Okay.
you get it when it's the bumbling sheriff back in her hometown, Cabot Cove, but like the rest of the world, you're like, that's no, no, and no. Also, she just always knows everything. Nothing ever goes wrong for her, really. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Um, so there's no realism to Murder, She Wrote, which doesn't mean it isn't delightful. Like I'm still watching them. That's another one where you go, hey, that's Linda Hamilton. She had already done The Terminator when she's did this episode of,
Wow.
right, and so
Wow.
it's, and oh, Bryan Cranston was her boyfriend, and I was like, oh my gosh, and he was young. Oh my gosh, he was a
Okay,
puppy.
this is so funny because he's my words of wisdom for this episode.
Oh,
Is Bryan
that's awesome. I
Cranston?
love
Yeah.
it.
We'll get to that. But it's funny how everything just comes together. Yay,
It's
Bryan
all
Cranston.
connected.
Anyway, yes.
Um, so I think I think it's that combination of realism but tongue-in-cheek
Hmm.
realism.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I'm betting even the 70s you couldn't just park an RV, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's literally
Right.
just a mobile home. There's no truck attached to it. It's not, and it's not the ones you drive on your own. It's just this crappy. And then he has a landline. He has a and I was like, but how though? Like that's not even possible.
Okay, yeah. Okay, here's a question. Um, I've never seen Rockford Files, but you're
Okay.
describing him as sort of like a snarky, bumbling, lovable loser. So when you're going, and I love that character type too,
Right.
but I think the trap that you can fall into is like over incompetence, basically. So how do you walk the tightrope? But he has to be competent or proactive at least enough to be the lead, right? So how do you write a character type like that that's walking the tightrope of kind of bumbly and like lovable versus too incompetent to be believable?
Well, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, like, because we can fall into those questions of like Columbo, right? Columbo, the bumbling was a part of his way of disarming you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you would underestimate him. And,
Mm-hmm.
it in Rockford Files is more, it's not that he's, because it's not bumbling, it's more like rushing in where angels fear to tread. Like there are just times
Ah.
where you can see. So the thing last
Like
night,
lack of a like no sense of self-preservation kind of
in
thing.
some ways, or like he gets charmed by a pretty girl in last night's episode. He runs into this woman on the beach. He's following somebody, and she's kind of rude with him or whatever. And then she drives by him, and she's like, he's walking up the road and she drives by and she drives super, super slow and they're having a conversation because that's totally how we do things, right? And that's so easy. But she's like, hey, why don't like I'm just up in this apartment building up the road. Why don't you come visit me? She also doesn't give him her apartment number. She just says she lives in that building, doesn't tell him her name, anything. Next scene, he's in the woman's apartment. And you're like, oh, Rockford, what are you thinking? And he goes, she makes a drink for him and he goes, you're not trying to fool me or anything, are you? As he drinks the drink. And then she's slipped him something in the drink. And he's
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
knew it. And you're like, dude, you knew it. Why? So he manages to get out of the apartment, but then he does something clever, which is he doesn't want them to know he's a private eye. So he takes his wallet out that has his private eye stuff and he tucks it under something in the hallway so they won't find it.
Hmm.
So it's this sort of thoughtlessness, right? Or this, it's not gullibility because he
He
knew
falls into mistakes, but then he's clever enough to sort of get himself out of
get
them.
himself out of them. But he's
Okay.
perpetually broke. That's kind of the joke. Perpetually broke. And he's a right. And I think the thing is he always solves the mystery, right? He always figures it out, but it doesn't always work out to his advantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's that and also he's sort of tenderhearted and or sort of like, I don't, tenderhearted isn't the right word, but he's got a good heart and he's kind of a do-gooder at heart, right? So he does these things to, he's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. It's $200 a day plus expenses. And
Yeah.
then he winds up being like, all right, well, how about this? Or how about that? And he never really makes any money off of it. So there's sort of, anyway, I think what I like about it is he gets himself into trouble and he gets himself out of trouble. And he's wisecracking the whole time.
Yeah.
And in the end, you're like, I just got to spend an hour with him. I don't know if that makes sense, right? But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like where I think you love the character so much, and then the mysteries are solid enough. Now, I haven't been watching a ton of them. I've only watched a couple, so I don't know if they stay that good. But I don't know. I like I said, but there's a new woman in every episode,
Of
and
course.
she somehow he gets tricked into whatever something with the woman, and then like the story goes on. So,
Yeah.
and it's set in LA
Okay.
in the 70s. It was like 74 when these are airing. And I mean, like, I'm like, wow, that was a different world in the 70s. Like,
Yeah,
whoa.
yeah. It
Anyway,
sounds like if you go to the character sliders
mhm,
that Writing Excuses podcast talks about,
okay.
the three sliders are proactivity, competence, and likability.
Hmm.
And it sounds like even though his slider sometimes goes down on competence, like he'll be
Hmm.
tricked or something,
Hmm.
he's always proactive and he's incredibly likable.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and that's what they talk about, that you don't need all, like, if your volume is dialed up 100% on all three of them, then you have like Clark Kent, you have like Superman,
Yeah. Yeah.
which not everybody's supposed to be Clark Kent. But if you have really likable, then we'll forgive some incompetence.
Right. And the truth is, I don't think mystery wise, incompetence sells very well.
Mm,
You know what I
mhm.
mean? And so I think this is really interesting talking about that slider. So another example would be Sherlock Holmes in Elementary, right?
Okay.
Incredibly competent. What was the first one that was
Proactive and
incredibly proactive, incredibly competent, but not
not always like when
likable.
I give lessons on the sliders, Sherlock is my example of high competence, high proactive, not very likable, but still a good guy. Because
Yeah,
usually it's your villain. Well, sometimes your villains are incredibly likable, but
right.
anyway, yes, exactly. Yeah, Sherlock fits that.
Yeah. And so I do think I don't think in mysteries it works to have someone who's always accidentally coming up. Like I think I think you can have it in some. I'm trying to see if I can make this make sense. But do you know what I mean? Someone who's incompetent who then sort of stumbles on the answer every time is problematic. Because the truth about a mystery is you also want to be able to figure it out, right? Like that's someone was telling me about someone who writes their mystery novels where anyone could have done it and then they decide at the end who did it. And I'm like,
Mm.
and I don't know who does that, but I don't, that is that I don't like
Yeah,
personally, I'm
yeah.
like, because
I'm trying to
I,
think of like high incompetence. The only one, like, because you're right, like I don't think it works unless you're like exaggerating and making it a comedy. Like I'm thinking of the movie The Man Who Knew Too Little with
okay, yeah, all right.
have that, but it wouldn't, like, you couldn't sustain a series that way.
I don't
Like
think so.
you
Yeah,
can't really, it's a comedy more than it is like you go for the comedy more than the
yeah,
mystery.
yeah. Although we still quote that movie. It's like, time out, I got something in my eye. Shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, and that's fun for an hour and a half.
Mhm.
But week after week, I don't think you could sustain it. So
Mm-mm.
really, if you're thinking about mystery characters, then competence has to be at a certain level for sustainability. And I'm thinking not just in like TV or like a movie series, but in books, right? Any
Right.
story with a detective or someone who's doing it, which is sort of why. I think cozy mystery. Look, I love cozy mystery, so I do not want to say anything about that. But I think sometimes cozy mysteries, you really have to play with that. Like there's a really fine line because they are not investigators by nature. So how do you, and I don't know that it always does work. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I mean, ultimately, when you think about it, Murder, She Wrote is a cozy mystery.
Right. I mean, that's who I was thinking of, or like Miss Marple. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is funny because I've never read a Miss Marple novel, but I've read a ton of Hercule Poirot and other
Mhm.
Agatha Christie books. It's funny, I've just never read Miss Marple. Oh, now I have an assignment. Um,
There you go.
yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah. Um, but I do think mysteries are made by your lead. Like whether it's a cozy, whether it's whatever the genre, whatever the medium, you have to buy into your investigator, whether they're a professional investigator or an amateur, right?
Mhm.
And if you don't, it doesn't work. Which is
Yeah.
why I think paranormal, we're non-professional investigators, but there's a paranormal or a supernatural element to it. I
Mhm.
think that really works because they have a special ability that makes up for which provides a competence level, right?
Totally.
Right. Does that, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And I kind of feel like the Brits have the market on at least current, I don't know. I'm when I'm thinking of really strong character-led mystery series, I'm everything I'm thinking of is from like BBC.
Yeah.
Like Lewis and Shetland and
Mhm.
Professor T and like
Yes. Oh, I loved Shetland. Although once he left, I haven't been able to. If they had made the brunette who was his second in command, if she had advanced and she was leading the team, I think I would have still been interested. But they brought someone new in, and I just found myself, I don't know, just less
yeah,
interested.
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been watching a new season of Dalgleish, Dalgliesh, Dalgleish.
Wow, I've never heard of that one.
Oh, I think you'd really like it.
Okay.
They're based on a series of P.D. James novels.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Okay. And it's also it's either BritBox or Acorn, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. Yeah.
I know, and I've been so tempted to get the PBS one too. I
That's
was
the
like,
one. It's I'm like, I don't need any of the others except BritBox and PBS.
there are so many good ones.
Yeah.
The Acorn has some good ones too. But yeah, no, your I think America tends to go with cops, like cop stories,
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
right? Although think, I mean,
And they
Dalgleish
are
is,
slightly different.
yeah, I mean, Dalgleish is a cop, Midsummer Murders, those are, I mean, so I don't know if
Yeah.
that's entirely true. I mean, Lewis, all right, maybe that was actually like a misspeak. Because there's actually a ton of them that are cops.
But it feels different the way that the UK does
Yeah.
cop
I
detective story
honestly
and the way
think it
we
has
do.
to do with guns, not to get controversial, but
In a lot of ways, yeah, yeah. I think you're right.
I think American detective stories where they're based in police, violence is always a part of the answer, right? Or a
It's
potential for the
it's
answer.
it just feels like, and again, this is total like broad strokes. They're
Very broad
exceptions, but
strokes, yeah.
it feels like it just feels like if you were going on a scale of like brain to brawn, the UK versions are just more brainy, like
Yeah.
thinking through things, and they're slower paced because they're brainy,
Yeah.
as opposed to like go in guns blazing.
Except
Which not
except
a
don't you also watch those British ones and they're like they're gonna go in and you're like, where's your gun?
with what? Going with what?
And you're
Yeah.
like, do you even have a baton? I'm like, at least pull your baton out when you're ready. And then they
Yeah.
just they just say to the person, just stop, Joe. And Joe, you're like, I don't know, maybe it's just a politer world entirely. But I was like, I don't know, if I were Joe, I'd be like, how you gonna make me? And then I'd be
Yeah.
like, no, running. So
Uh, and the differences between
yeah.
Brits
But
and Yankees right there.
yeah. But um one of the things I really enjoy is weird detective stuff.
Mhm.
Pushing Daisies is one of my all-time
Yes.
favorite shows, right? Weird, but they invest.
Character led.
Yeah,
Like it's about the characters.
yes. And yet the mysteries I thought were solid. Um,
Mhm.
I love Castle was one of my favorites. Like, I
Fun.
absolutely adore Castle, even though it was cheesy and unrealistic. I mean, come on, he would never. And the fact that he was so rich, I was like, the least believable part is that a mystery writer would be that wealthy.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Uh,
But I'm trying to think of, oh, there was another one and I just lost it. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of the detective show. I love the setup. I love the laying out of clues. And this is where also Murder She Wrote, I thought fell down, was that it was most of the time it was pretty obvious who
mhm.
had done it. And I'm like, it's not just because I'm years old and watched a lot of this, so read a lot. It's the clues are very heavy-handed, I thought.
Mhm.
And I like something that's got a little more subtlety to it, or that's sort of silly. Um,
Right.
but
Well, and as you're writing this, like I think you've done the homework. You're someone who is familiar, very familiar with this genre, as you are now embarking on writing one of your own.
yeah. Well, I mean, technically, my first three books were all mysteries, right?
True. True.
Right.
Yes.
And then the one I'm writing right now is a mystery. One of my big things is when you write mysteries for children is I never wanted to talk down to the kids. I
Mhm.
also didn't want to make it formulaic. Well, it turns out that sometimes when you're writing for younger readers and you have a very limited amount of space to write, like you just don't have the same volume, you should simplify. Well, we've been talking about my inspiration for a while. Why don't we talk about, our challenges? What's going on with you right
Yeah. So I hesitated to talk about this just because I, I don't know. I feel a little guilty about this as a challenge, and I feel like it's very much exactly what I have been like the challenge that I've been facing the last month, I guess. Um, and so I was like, all right, other people might be facing this too. So, uh,
Let's
and really, I mean, probably everyone is because really my challenge ultimately boils down to not being motivated to write, like not uh caring to sit down to the page because of like the specific angle on that because I think everyone has that uh
Mhm.
being enticed by shiny other creative stuff. So the last couple months I have been sort of secretly um sending out like self-tape auditions and I've got like a callback scheduled for something and like an audition for a local community theater next month. Um, and I have just been having so much fun with that. Um, and it honestly feels like because the when I was a kid, the two things I always wanted to be like I was like, do I be a writer or do I be an actor? And I also wanted to be a National Geographic photographer until I realized that you have to like sleep in the mud. And I was like, probably not that.
Maybe, yeah.
But so it honestly, the last month or so has felt like this part of me is like finally being acknowledged again. And it's almost embarrassing to say that. Like I saw this interview with actors, and the actor who plays Hopper in Stranger Things, it was like 7 or 8 different actors talking about being actors, and
Mhm.
he was like, you have to uh, be okay with humiliation. It's honestly a humiliating thing to want to do, and I was like, I get that. Like I get
Yeah.
like so you're saying you want to like be on stage or perform but anyway and I think any creative endeavor like oh you want to write a book oh you want to or all those things but I've been having so much fun with this despite feelings of humiliation that I have just been unmotivated to like sit down and write and I know like I can feel that it's still there like it's not like that has changed
No, but
but I basically it's a question of balance and motivation and like how do I get myself like to kind of to do all these things that I want to do and give them each the love and care they need.
I definitely have some thoughts on this. I mean, first
Please.
and foremost, though, all creativity is connected. You are feeding your writing creativity by feeding other types of creativity. 100%. That's all connected. Like doing art, doing photography, anything that taps into your creativity. You draw. Where I think this is some kind of, I don't know. It's the puritanical work ethic that often goes along with oh, my writing is my full-time job, and so I got to do it 8 hours a day. Well, creativity actually doesn't work like that. And if it does, it doesn't necessarily work like that for everybody. I
Mhm.
mean, right? It's not realistic to say you should be working 9 to 5 as if you were in a job if you can't produce anything, right? I I think that for some people, creativity is cyclical. Your areas of interest are it's seasonal, right? You're not in your season of writing right now. You're in your season of performing. That's great. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. There's nothing to feel bad about or guilty about. That's great because if you trust yourself, right, you'll
Mhm.
come back to writing. You always do, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you'll come back to performing because you always do. Because contrary to what everyone says, you can love more than one thing. You can love to do
Yes.
more than one thing. We live in a world that praises specialty, when in fact, many of us are generalists. That's the terms I've heard, right? Like a specialist or a generalist.
Mhm.
And specialists like to go deep, really deep. And generalists like to do many, many things,
Mhm.
right? Neither is good or bad, right? And if we accept that none of it's good or bad, you absolutely are you having fun? Are you able to pay your look, as long as you're able to pay your rent and feed yourself, who cares? Go
Yeah.
do what
Yeah.
you want to do, brings you joy. There's no, I don't know, I feel like we get this idea of the tortured artist or I just think to me, that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. You absolutely should be doing that if that's where you're called. Like right now, if that's where your enthusiasm comes from, if that's bringing you joy, if it's, you know, I don't know,
Mhm.
I feel like life's too short to be miserable, and people will tell. And living by other people's standard of rightness in your creativity. I mean, there's a certain standard of rightness, like, i.e., we're not going to go out and stab anybody. You know what I mean? Like, that's a generally agreed upon thing, right?
Yes.
Maybe go crazy, go crazy. I love that you've
I
been doing.
love hearing that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think you and I are very similar in this. Do you know? I mean, like, but
Mhm.
my roommate from college is a specialist, and she works with leukemia in children, and
Wow.
she's been doing this for 20 plus years, and she loves it. She's really good at this. And I'm like, hey, what about this or what about this? And she was like, no, no, I like this. And I'm like, but how out 20 years are you not ready to jump ship and do something different? And she's like, there's always something new to learn. I can always go deeper. And I was like, I get it. You feel that in a single area, and I feel that it's like vertical
Right.
versus horizontal, right?
Right.
So
I
yeah.
love that. And honestly, what you said about creativity feeding each other, because me kind of filling this part of my creative well, like acknowledging it for it feels like honestly, it's felt so freeing. But it has helped me find focus on the writing projects that I actually do want to do, that I do care about. Like
Yeah.
at the same time as I've been kind of really diving in for like actually trying on this, I've also been like, I really want to write picture books, and I really want to write like young chapter books, and I've like sort of quirky, weird, like I've felt more focus on that as well. Um, and you can't always like I have some projects on my plate right now that aren't those things, and maybe that's why I'm feeling unmotivated because I need to get these. these, they're still lovely and wonderful, and I'm glad I'm doing them, but they're more coming like they came onto my plate from more of an obligation than like my own.
Mhm.
And I accepted them gladly, and I'm glad I'm
Yeah.
doing it. But
Yeah.
maybe I'm like, oh, that it's my motivation is low to sit down and actually do them.
And it's really fair. And look, we got to put bread on the table, right? We got to keep a roof over our heads. So sometimes we do have to use our creativity, and this is actually a great problem to have, I think. You know what I mean? Like I get to like my goal has always been I want to support my family with my writing. Well, that's awesome and that's fantastic, but then I have to support my family with my writing, right? So how the same thing can be wonderful and freeing and also a huge responsibility and that can play with your creativity, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't, again, unless you're hurting someone, actively hurting someone, right? I don't think you can do creativity wrong. There's no, and there's no wrong,
There's our motto right there. You can't do creativity wrong.
and you can't put it in the wrong direction either. Again, unless you're actively hurting someone with it, right?
Yeah.
You can't, there's no wrong way to be creative. And so yeah, I do think it's that sense of like the people who say you got to get your butt in the chair at 8 a.m. every day and oh you have to write every day. And then you're like, yeah, but that doesn't work for me. But I'm
I'm
gonna
almost
bend my
jealous of those people.
I am too, but actually I I think you're probably happier if that is not what you are naturally bent towards. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
if that's natural for you and you enjoy that and that gives you satisfaction or whatever, fantastic.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't, then you have to stop trying. We just have to stop doing someone else's routine. You
That's
know?
okay. And that makes me think of Strengths Finder. I think we've talked about Gallup Strengths Finder and Becca Symes
Yeah.
on the podcast before, because one of the 32 strengths or whatever is discipline. And
Yeah.
that those people literally find satisfaction just through the act of discipline. It almost doesn't
Yeah.
matter what they're disciplining themselves to do. Like I have an aunt who has that, and every year she runs the number of miles of whatever year it is. So like last year she ran 2023 miles. And I'm like, why? Why?
That
And
does
it's
not
just
sound great, but I get it.
at 5 a.m. She does,
Mhm.
and maybe and so I think maybe the only way to do creativity wrong is to do it wrong for you. Like if you're a
Yes.
discipline person,
Yeah.
do it discipline.
Yeah.
If you're a positivity person like us, like let it be kind of exuberant
Yeah.
and bubbly.
Well, and no joy in there is no joy in life for anybody in putting someone else's template over you. You know, like I find that people, and this is just sort of, I think, for safety, I think it's a facet of human nature. People crave homogeny, sameness, and they crave things they can understand. It's a big, scary world. So we like to put things in categories, right? And that's sort of fine if you're just doing that mentally, right? But once you start putting that onto other people as if it's their responsibility to fit your
Mhm.
categories, your shift so that you don't have to be uncomfortable or face something. That's not okay, right? But
Right.
we take that on. And especially because a lot of people are very, very confident in how they'll tell you to be, right? And that this is how you should be. But I
And this
just,
is how to succeed at this
yeah,
thing,
yeah, yeah.
which it is for them. Like that's great.
That's
And maybe there
great.
is some things
Yeah,
you can learn from it,
yeah,
but you don't have to bring your own strengths to it.
yeah.
I like
You
that.
just have to bring you to it. You will never be happy and you will never be happy and fulfilled if you are not you in what you're doing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and you can be successful, you can be rich, and those are definitely things that bring some kind of joy, but like real joy, deep down joy, and sustainable joy comes from being your authentic self and taking that into the world. I mean, I think I've said this a million times. There are like seven stories in the world, right? And we're all just retelling them.
Yeah.
So what makes it, why do we keep reading? Why do we keep going back for them? It's the special sauce, right? It's the you element to it. So you have to bring that to it. So I'm loving that you're doing that. And you should never, ever feel embarrassed to say stuff like that. It's the
Well, thank
adventurer
you.
in you. And I think that's magnificent. But also, Sarah, if you're willing to take the rejection and the humiliation or the whatever, the
Yeah.
downsides of it, then then you want to do it. We were just talking about this actually before we started recording. I was actually, this is the book I should do for the resource. All right, might segue a little bit in.
Resource, yay!
I had a different book picked out, but I have been reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, and in it he talks about there were two premises. One was happiness, joy comes from solving problems, not avoiding them or not having them. And there's more to talk about that at some other time. But the second premise, this is as far as I've gotten anyway. I'm sure there are other in the book, but the second premise was if you don't want to do the work, if you really don't want to do the unpleasant parts or the repetitive parts, the boring parts, right? If you don't want to do that, then you don't really want to do it. So you are willing to face, so I'm going to go back now to the struggle, but if you're all of the downside because you get more joy from doing it, just from doing it, I think that's fantastic. And that's empowering, you know.
I think even in like what we write and like our genres, like I think it can even be that specific. Like there are some genres maybe that like you like putting together a mystery, you like following that.
Right.
And maybe other people they like writing, but they don't want to. That's not the work that they want to do. They want to create a magic system, or they want to write about sad little kids, which I have done. um, but so I think even that breaking it down that to that level too of like even within the creative projects, like follow the work that you want to do. It's not always easy,
Uh,
but it the work that you want to do.
One of the perfect examples is I write animal POV. And when I was looking for agents, I was quite surprised at the number of agents that were like, did not want animal POV, like were like vehemently against it. And some because they actually hate it. And some because I had one agent and she was lovely and she was like, my brain doesn't work like that. I just never think of animals in that way. And I'm like, you never
It's
seen
so weird. Who doesn't like anthropomorphize?
like your cat doesn't do something and you don't look at them and you can't hear them being like, ah, you like me now. I mean, like, but as long as the real problem isn't that people work in different ways. The real problem, I think, is that people want to tell you how you work is wrong, that their way is the only way. And I don't trust anybody, and I mean anybody who tells you there's only one way to do something, unless it's like chemistry. And then I'm like, probably I don't want to blow up, but I'm not doing chemistry. I don't even bake really. But
Okay, creatively, there's nothing. You can do heart surgery wrong, but other
yeah,
things.
all right, fair, right. All right, so my resource was The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. I never did look up who wrote that. Really, I can do that super quick.
We'll link it, and I love that. I think it can get us motivated when we're feeling stuck creatively.
Mark name, yes. And I think it's just across the board. I think it's like because he's not a creative writer, or he didn't write it specifically for creatives. It was
Right,
kind of
right.
for everybody, but you can see how it applies like that. All
Yeah,
right. So
absolutely.
that is the resource. What are our words of wisdom today from Brian Cranston?
From Bryan Cranston. So, and I love this quote because I do feel like it applies just in general creatively. And it got me thinking when I read it. He said, "When I ask if you're talented, you'd better say yes, not in a boasting sort of way, just a quiet confidence. Yes, I'm talented. I know I am. You need that, and you need persistence, and you need patience, and that's not contradictory." And I love that because I feel like when people ask what's the best creative advice you can give, it on in some ways it comes down to that. It's a balance of stubbornness and humility,
Mhm.
where no one's gonna you're no nothing that anyone can say will stop you. Like you've got the stubborn side, that you want to do this, you can do it, and if there are things you can't yet, you're going to learn.
Right.
But that brings you to the humble side of like, it's not because I'm better than anyone. It's like I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to like be grateful for every opportunity that's given me. And I think that's what he's talking about with persistence and patience. That it does take time, and that building their whatever creative thing you're doing, you have to believe in it, but you also have to like come at it with an attitude of gratitude, and and humility for everyone who's like helping you, and what you can learn from them, and all that. So I like that advice.
Which is interesting because that was the part that I focused on. It was the first part, which where he says you have to be able to own your talent. So we hear a lot of people in the creative arts who have imposter syndrome, right? Like I know a lot of writers who have imposter syndrome. And I I don't know when that left, but I do not have imposter syndrome. I'm like, no, I know I'm
Well
good.
done.
You know what I mean? I'm like, I know I'm good at this. Am I the greatest that's ever been? No, but I don't have to be. And we could all argue who the greatest that's ever
Well, and
written.
that's the whole thing, is that I think that saying you're talented, and having that confidence is has nothing to do with comparison. It's not about
Yeah.
like what are we going to say? Okay, Mozart or Beethoven, who's the best? Like, no,
Yeah.
that's not even the question. That's not the right question. It has nothing to do. I don't think confidence has anything to do with comparison. It's just like, yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
And you do what you do really well.
Well, so do you. But that's the thing. I think you can have patience and persistence when you know when you know you've got the ability. And we can be like, oh, do I have talent? And talent maybe gets loaded as a term, but
Mhm.
ability, I have the ability to do this and to do it well, I think. Now, other people might disagree, and that's up to them, but as long as they're not shoving their opinion in my face, which they can do on reads or anything else, right? Or the comment section here. But um, I really do think confidence creates the ability to be persistent and
Mhm.
patient, and also the humility. Do you know what I mean? It's not pride or braggadocio to say, I'm skilled at what I do. You
Mhm.
know, we
Yep.
are competent. We are, and to be say, I'm good at what I do.
Yeah.
And that's great because then I don't have to waste energy on trying to, this is again where I think you're trying to please someone else. It's someone else's idea of what success is or
Yep.
whatever. But
Yep.
also talent doesn't guarantee success because I don't want to name any names, but there are definitely people who've made a lot of money in publishing. And I'm like, that is not a good
Yeah.
book.
And the flip side, I know I have plenty of friends who I think are way more naturally talented writers than I am, but they aren't confident enough to be persistent. And
Yeah.
that I think is even more crucial to success, is the grit, the persistence,
Yeah.
than a ethereal some definition of talent.
No, I agree. I agree. Great
Well, with
quote.
those words from the lovely Bryan Cranston, uh, we wish you a happy creative week, and go forth and write and create and do whatever you're doing, and do it your way.
Yes. Thank you for being with us.